Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. It is a blackest heart, a blackest mind, a blackest man on social media, signing black in and shining again, asking you all to hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. All right, with me today is Torch Blaze, and he is now beginning the pilot episode of The Reality Check. The Reality Check is a show that is aimed to, it's a podcast, and it is aimed to dispel myths and awaken truth and freedom of expression for all oppressed and marginalized people around the world. Torch and I have recently started this, and I became the co-host through his grace. I appreciate that. Torch Blaze is now living in the southern half of India, and for privacy reasons, I'm not going to state which state specifically he's living in, because he has to come to us through a VPN and through some anonymity channels, because the government does not really appreciate what he's discussing here. I have said on my channel multiple times that although I do advocate for black folks to repatriate, and I do advocate for black men to look for marriage partners outside of the traditional stereotypical community in North America, I have also said that I do not advocate that we go and try to live in places, or especially try to marry into communities that have anti-black sentiment. This is the rule that I've talked about. I have mentioned that there are some exceptions. Torch Blaze is here today in order to give us more info on one of the exceptions, for whatever it's worth, and for whatever many of us may want to know. We are used to hearing that everyone hates us, and while there is anti-blackness internationally, we're used to hearing that everybody around the globe is an enemy. And he's here to explain an actual scenario in which, or an actual scenario of an exception. So, Torch, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, sir. Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Wa alaikum assalam, and assalamu alaikum to all the viewers and listeners to this episode. Thank you for having me on your show, Black Mind.
Gladly, sir.
Yeah, I hope we could dispel some of the myths that we have relating to India being an anti-black place, you know?
Yeah. Well, I've said that for the most part it is based on what the news coverage is, but I'm aware through you that there are pockets, both politically and geographically, where there are exceptions. The rule, as we understand it, is that it's anti-black. That's the rule that we've been told even by others from the country. And you may have heard that in the United States, there are many businesses that are owned by both Arabs and people from the subcontinent, not just your nation, but even neighboring Pakistan. But in these businesses that are owned by them and in the black communities, you may have heard about the friction between the black community residents and these business owners at times. So the rule, yeah, that's the rule that we have. But we understand the viewers will understand from you today what the exception is, or where and how the exception is.
Yeah, the misconception comes from the lack of understanding, right? So people think that Pakistan was generally always a country in existence, right? But before 1945, there was no concept of Pakistan. Pakistan didn't exist in the minds of anyone. Pakistan didn't exist geographically. It was not a nation. So it was formed because the Muslims in India somehow started to think that they would never have the same freedoms that they enjoyed when they were the ruling elite. So India is one of the very few countries, I don't know if there's another country, that Muslims managed to rule while still being in a minority, right? So
Yes.
when the British that had colonized India, when they were leaving India, so this kind of confused the Muslims, like, what are we going to do now? Now we're going to come under majority Hindu rule because it's going to be a democracy. So Pakistan was created by the Muslim elite, not by the Dalits, not by the poor, not by the oppressed, by the Muslim elites. That's why you see an elitist approach from the Pakistanis, because they're elite, right?
Okay.
And you don't give heed to their narrative. And when you look at India, all of the media, all of the Indian businesses are dominated by the elite as well. So you never hear the narrative of the other, which is actually the majority of India. Like, India is a massive country. Like, we have 1.2 billion people, and you would probably only hear from 200 million Indians who are the elite, who are ruling the 1 billion. When you look at the 1 billion people, they're generally pro-black. This is my understanding of India.
So wait a minute. I was aware of a pocket of the society and some of the geographical locations that were at least not anti-black and were capable of feeling sympathy at this time, especially in the wake of the George Floyd protests. I was aware of this, but I was aware of this as an exception. You're telling me that that about a fifth of the country is elitist, and that the other four fifths would sooner sympathize with us than they would sympathize with Europeans. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. See, the thing is, when you talk about India, we've been under approximately 250 years of colonial oppression, right? So this has created a mindset where white people are regarded as superior. But if you look at it generally, the 4/5 of the country would psychologically be supportive to any black liberation movements. Do you understand me? But the
Okay.
problem is, the 4/5. Like, if you look at India, you could say like 200 to 300 million people were living in the top tier to the middle class, and the rest of India, like 700 to 800 million, live in different forms of poverty, like from basic sustenance to absolute poverty. When I mean absolute poverty, they have nothing. So it's worse than homelessness in the U.S. At least the homeless have clothes and somewhere, and maybe a sidewalk to sleep on. But when you're looking at India, these people don't even have sidewalks. They sleep in the jungles. Maybe I don't know what they do, but most of these people don't get the necessary media coverage. They don't have access to the internet. So where are you going to hear their voices from? And they don't migrate to the US to start businesses. They can barely survive in India. So how are they going to reach the US? They never make it there. So the people in the US that you're meeting are part of the elitists who already believe that being black is a crime, being black is a sin, being black is being inferior, right? Because you never hear the people who are really oppressed within India.
Okay. So the ones who leave the country. Well, let me ask this: in order to get a comparison between the U.S. and the U.K., I know that you've not lived in either one of those nations, but as far as back in India, are you aware of a difference between the ones who get visas to go to the United States and the ones who get visas to go to the UK? Because I am aware of a difference between the ones who get visas to go to the Arabian Gulf and work and the ones who get visas to go to the UK. In other words, in the Arabian Gulf where I'm living, I can't say which country in front of my audience because I've already gotten threats on this channel, but in the Gulf where I'm living, the people from the subcontinent in general that I meet here are not the same as the ones that I met back in the States. So as far as you are concerned, as far as you know there, is there a difference between somebody that wants to go to the UK and someone that wants to go to the US for the benefit of our viewers?
Yes, there is a big difference. So India is not one country, right? India is like you could compare it with the European Union. Everybody's white in the European Union, but nobody says, "Oh, you're all Europeans. Say something in European." Nobody does that. But when it comes to Indian, they say, "Oh, let me hear you talking in Indian." What is Indian? There's no language called Indian, right?
It's,
And
it's like African. It's not
yeah,
one language.
yeah, you don't say some. You don't go to an African and say, "Oh, you're an African. Say something in African." It's not one country. It's just all black people living on a continent. It's the same with India. India is like all brown people with completely different languages, completely different thought processes, completely different cultures, completely different outlooks and approaches to for example, black people. They approach black people very differently in different parts of India. So in southern India, where I'm from, we embrace our blackness, but there is a majority. I mean, there is a minority. I'm sorry, there is a minority even within the southern states who believe that white is better. But the majority in South India believe in embracing our blackness. So what I'm trying to say is when you look at the Middle East, you see mostly people who migrate from Kerala, the state of Kerala. So Kerala has historic trade links with not only the Middle East but also Europe. So they've been trading for thousands of years. When Islam first came to India, it came to the Malabar region in Kerala, right? So they've been in touch with Arabia for thousands of years. So they know all the things that have been progressing in Arabia. They know the people there. Arabs have married into families in Kerala. So what you see mostly in Arabia are migrants from Kerala. So once the Keralites started getting rich from the Gulf boom, uh, normally the other states in South India also started migrating to the Middle East to make their wealth. What do you notice that's different about the people in the Middle East and the people in UK or Europe in general and the US is that the people who come to the Middle East are very culturally rooted to their own societies. You'll find them sticking together. You'll find kind of an African like trait amongst them that they don't come out of their cultural barriers. Have you noticed that with the people in the Middle East?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're very
Yes.
protective of their culture. They don't come out of their cultural roots, and they don't want to migrate on a permanent basis. They only see the Middle East as an opportunity to make money and go back to their original roots, to their original countries, or to their original states and establish an economic security, something that could last a few generations. Like they make wealth and they take it back to their own city or village or state or wherever they're from. Okay, but the people who migrate to the US, the UK, Europe, they don't want to do anything with India. They're done with India. They're migrating because they're educated, they're elite, they already have millions of dollars worth of property and everything here in India. They have access to high-end education. They've already had the best in India. Now they're looking to up their game. They're looking to move to the next quadrant, the next level in life, right? They're never going to come back to India. So that's why they go there for the passports, for citizenships. They want to migrate from India. They're done with the poverty, with the impoverishment. They don't want to do anything with it. They don't want to partner with India and try to uplift the rest of the poor. They're just selfish people who want to move away from India and want to have nothing to do with India. Do you understand?
I got it now. Okay. So if they go to the Middle East, if I heard you correctly, if they go to the Middle East, then they're usually going to work and then go back home.
Yep. They're going
Okay.
to go
And then
back home. They're going to improve the lives of the communities around them. That's the most important thing that you see in the migrants in the Middle East. If you hire a migrant, if you become a company owner in future, let's say inshallah you become a company owner in future, and you hire a migrant.
inshallah.
Yeah, you hire a South Indian migrant in one of your concerns, one of your businesses. You'll see that he starts bringing recommendations from his village. He will uplift the community this way. He will bring more people from his village, from his family, wherever he can, and he will uplift the community. This is the thinking of the South Indians. But what you see in the Americans, they're very selfish. Once they get to the US, they don't want to do anything with India. Now they're there. They either want to marry a white woman because, according to them, white is superior. In rarest of the rare cases, you see them marrying a black woman, but it's very rare. I've never seen somebody I know, an Indian I know, that's gone to the US and married a black woman. They marry Hispanics because they're fair. So fairness is very important to these people who come to the West.
Well, they marry the Hispanics that go to the U.S. because they're fairer. But in all honesty, a lot of Latin Americans aren't as fair as they're depicted on TV. Um, they, yeah, it's not as fair as what you see on television. But yeah, I have noticed when I was in the States, I noticed it in the instance when a man from the subcontinent in general would marry an African American or an African woman, they usually weren't doing too well financially in many cases. And I'm talking about the ones who were born in the subcontinent and then migrated to the States. The ones that were born in the States, I noticed that their attitude could have been anything. They could have been the exact same as their parents. They could have been completely different, but there was a diversity there. Whereas amongst those who left home, it was almost never a diversity of opinion. Almost never. Now, among Sri Lankans, I did notice a different attitude, but that's a different country. Even though it's closer to southern India than it is to northern India or to Bangladesh or Pakistan, it's not. I'm aware that it's a different nation altogether, and I'm aware that their language is different from your language. Or I should say your languages. By the way, how many languages do you speak outside of English?
I can speak around 4 languages.
Okay. Wow, 4 of them. Okay. And I thought I was good because I could learn 2. So, all
I
right.
started
So
reading Russian as well. I can
you
read
started
Russian
to,
now.
you
Read
can
and type.
read
Yeah,
Russian.
I can read and type Russian now.
What do you eat, man?
But Russian is one of the hardest languages I've tried to learn. It's super hard. They have such rich literature, and their vocabulary is super rich. I don't know how they managed to do it because uh, when I look at English, English is still very simple. You can still process it, but Russian is super hard to process. But now, Alhamdulillah, I can read and write Russian. I can type Russian. I never tried writing it. I can type it on a keyboard.
You were too much. All right. Well, remind me to find out what your diet is later on. Um, so, since you're going to tell us about the exceptions, and you told me more than what I previously knew, that
Yeah.
apparently anti-blackness is the minority opinion in your country. And I was under the assumption that it was more so the norm. One of the things I'll have to ask you about before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this is going to be about the skin bleach. Now, if you live in the southern half, I already know the northern half, it's bleached out. You can barely sell any skincare product that does not contain a whitening agent in it. I'm very sure that the north is like that. As I'm very sure that the north fits the stereotype until you tell me otherwise. But in your particular region, if it's a minority opinion, why is it that skin bleach is one of the major selling cosmetic products in your country?
Uh, you keep saying minority like it's a very small number of people. It's like anywhere between 200 to 300 or 400 million people. Like because India is so massive, it's got 1.2 billion people. Even
Yes.
even 300 to 400 million people doesn't make a difference, right? They're still a minority within India, but they are very vocal because they have access to education, they have access to the internet, they have access to flying, so they travel all around the world. So their narratives are heard more, right? That's the only reason. So even these guys, they make up a very big part of the market. So I told you that they worship white people. It's because of the colonial mindset. It's the afterwash of the colonialism that India was subjected to. So because of that, now these people tend to think white is better. And whenever they're looking for a spouse, they always specify this in their marriage advertisements that my spouse should be fair, ideally fair. We don't understand what that means. So because there's so many different color shades, like India is like a color chart, right? When you start at the top of India, you get pink, like they're like real Caucasians, and then you come down. As you come down India, the shade starts getting darker and darker and darker. Once you reach South India, you find the blackest of black people. I mean, how are you gonna it is scientifically and physically impossible to whiten a black man. You can't do that, right?
Yeah.
So the black people, even if you invest in all of these creams and whitening products, skin whitening treatments, he's not gonna get his black skin whitened. It's just not gonna happen. Maybe he's gonna take it like one or two shades lighter. That's the best that the melanin doesn't wash away. You know that, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I know. I know. I've
so
tried to steal some from some other people before, and I couldn't get it out of them. But
good
I
luck
failed
with that.
miserably.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're either blessed with melanin or you're not, right? You either
yeah.
go out in the sun and get roasted like a white guy, or you have melanin and you walk out in the sun without a shirt and nothing happens to you. So these are the two extremes that we live in. So in India, so these 300 to 400 million or 200 to 300 million, I can't pinpoint the exact number of people who are already bought into the minority narrative. They are the vocal majority, right? They represent the spending power. I don't think a poor man, like I told you, 600 to 700 million people in India are living in dire poverty. It's start from different levels of poverty, starting from huts, people living in huts, to those who are homeless, right? So
Hmm.
so these people never have access to the whitening creams, the whitening products, the whitening treatments. They don't have any access to it, right? They're happy to
Okay.
live black. They will be born black. They will live black all their life, and they will die as black people. They're not going to buy any of these products because these are expensive products. I mean, uh, considerably expensive when you look at the cost of living in India. Maybe it's not when you convert it into dollar terms. Maybe it's not that expensive, but in India, when you look at the cost of living and the kind of money you make by doing any kind of work, it is expensive. So a poor person, the 600 to 700 million who live in dire poverty, and maybe the few 100 million in between the middle class and the poor, who you can't classify as poor, and you can't classify as having a decent wage to live, they're not going to spend on all this, right?
Okay.
So
And so and so the people that live, ironically, the people that live in this dire poverty also don't have access to the media through which they would get the brainwashing that would make the whitening cream more desirable to them.
uh,
Am I understanding you correctly?
see, the thing is, in India we have things called we have community-based. Uh, how do I put it? Uh, so for example, in a village, there could be a TV, a television that would be accessible to maybe 100 or 200 poor villagers. So they will come together and watch TV together. On the TV, you see the vocal minority, the vocal majority, sorry, the vocal majority's view and perception that white is always better. Whenever you look at programming, you see fair-skinned heroes, fair-skinned heroines. I don't know if you use the word heroine in the US. In India, it's supposed to mean the lead female cast. It's called
Yes.
heroine.
Heroin.
So
Yes.
yeah, so the heroine and the hero, they're always white. In the vocal minorities narrative, it's always, it's always a white person, a fair-skinned person. So psychologically, most of the poor people in India do feel that they're inferior, but they never use any of the whitening products because they can't buy them.
Okay, so the brainwashing still affects them, but there's not much they can
Of
do
course,
about it.
of
I
course,
see.
everybody
Okay.
needs entertainment, right? And who controls the entertainment industry? You know very well how white supremacy works.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next question. You said that a lot of these ideas came about from the colonization. Um, Now, when I was looking up the origins of white supremacy, what I found was that it actually didn't start in Europe, but that it started in the ancient region of area, which is the border between Iran and Afghanistan today. That those were the actual Aryan people from whom Hitler took the name Aryan, and they were the ones that began white supremacy. Now, I learned about this actually from an Afghan who knew Aryan people and explained that they were the first ones to come up with this idea. And apparently some of them went into India and began what we know as the Aryan invasion or the Aryan settlement. Some people say it was an invasion, others say it was a settlement. But how would we explain the caste system with its colorism preceding the colonization? Was it an idea that most people didn't know about on the ground?
So now you're taking me into a very, very detailed subject. That is the Aryan migration theory. So the original theory was the Aryan invasion theory, but we don't have enough evidence to prove that the Aryans actually invaded India. But we do have enough proof today to actually categorically state that the Aryans did migrate in large numbers, and when they migrated to India, it was mostly men, and they took Dravidian or black women from India, impregnated them, and spread their genome type within India. So we know this for a fact. If we go back to the original civilizations of India, that's the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa civilizations, the ancient civilizations that existed about the same time. Some say preceding the Egyptian, Sumerian, and Assyrian civilizations, and some say they were contemporaries with the Egyptian, Sumerians, and Assyrians. So the Mohenjo-daro, Harappan civilizations were built by black South Indians, right? People who were my ancestors. So the black South Indians, they built up these massive cities, these massive and impressive civilizations, and the Aryans were just nomadic goat herders. They were nothing else. They were just nomadic goat herders, but they knew how to use horses in warfare, and they were taller and probably stronger because they were doing hard work, hard labor. So these people, they started coming into India, and there is a scientific study done by a lot of genealogists that actually prove the Central Asian the Aryans brought their genome type, the haplogroup. It's called the haplogroup. It's called R1A haplogroup into India and spread it. So the spread happens when an Aryan male marries a Dravidian female, right? And eventually there is a chain of events that you could actually correlate. It's like linking the dots. Most of this history is unwritten, so we don't really know for sure. But what they do is reverse engineer it. They reverse study it by looking at the bodies, by looking at the excavations, what kind of people existed there, and this is how they study it. So after the Aryan invasion, or Aryan migration as they now call it, the Dravidians started moving south, right? They were initially living in the northern regions of India, but they then started moving south. But logically speaking, I don't think a mass migration of that kind would happen unless they felt threatened, right? And the entire region of North India was wiped out of Dravidian people, except for a few pockets like Balochistan in Pakistan. In modern Pakistan, if you look at Balochistan, they look like South Indians. They're Dravidian people, so they still remain there. If you look at West Bengal, in that's also part of North India, you see Dravidian people there as well. But majority of the Dravidian people moved to the south. So unless there was a threat from the Aryans, I don't think they would be actually moving south, right?
Okay.
So
Makes sense.
This is just part of the theory. And then the Aryans moved in with their books, with their foreign language. Have you heard of Sanskrit, the language Sanskrit?
Yes, sir.
Okay, they say it's the ancient language of India. I mean, they say the Aryans of India, they try to promote it as a language of India. But we know for sure from archaeological evidence that Sanskrit is a European language, not an Indian language. It is more similar to Germanic and Latin than it is to any other Indian language. So it came with the Aryans. It's an invader's language, Sanskrit. The ancient language of India that doesn't exist today, the original language which was spoken by Buddha and all the other spiritual leaders, the kings. They used to speak a language called Pali. It is non-existent today, but Pali is the original ancient language of India. So the Sanskrit speaking migrants, now we can only call them migrants because we don't have the evidence to call them invaders. So the migrants replaced Pali with Sanskrit. So after a while, all the kings, all the learned people, all the spiritual leaders started speaking in Sanskrit, and that's how Sanskrit progressed. Ironically, the oldest inscriptions of Sanskrit are found in Syria, not in India.
Okay. Wow.
I could give
That's-
evidence for everything. I'm not talking conspiracy. I don't like see there's a lot of conspiracy theories floating around about these kind of things, but I don't like to speak about conspiracy. I like to speak based on archaeological fact and proven science. I want science to prove it before I actually say it. So whatever I've said, I can prove with links, and these are researcher links published by they're all peer reviewed. So, and they're published by universities, so you have no doubts they're not conspiracy theories.
Okay, fair enough. Now, the thing I have to ask is about, and that's a lot to digest about the language, and we needed to know that to a certain extent about who invaded. But the thing I've got to wonder about is that did the white supremacist attitude and the pro-white ideas in the population there, did those ideas start with the colonizer, or did they start with the Aryan invasion, or did it happen at some time in between? As far as you can trace back, where did this begin in India? Oh, I'm sorry. When did it begin in India?
Okay. So now, when the Dravidians, the original founders of the ancient civilizations in India, were black people, who are dark-skinned, if you want me to put it more correctly, they're dark-skinned people. They started moving south, right?
Yes.
And they established very powerful kingdoms that were never dominated by the Aryans for at least 3,000 years.
Okay.
The region where I'm living, the part of India where I'm living, the southernmost part of India, we've never lost a war until the British came.
Uh-huh.
We've never lost a war for at least 5,000 years. Never lost a war. The Portuguese came, they lost miserably. The Dutch came, they lost miserably. They just couldn't fight and win. But what the British did was they locked on to the greed of certain nobles, and they enforced and enacted coups that resulted in them gaining power. But militaristically, we were never defeated. If you look at history, I can prove this as well. If you look at a map of the Gupta dynasty, of the Mauryan dynasty, of even the Mughals, the Mughals were the most powerful Muslims who ruled India. They never managed to subdue us. They never had us under control. So the South Indians, the black people of India, always lived independently once we established our kingdoms in the south. So if you look at the religious texts of the Aryans, which are the most common ones are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So in these texts, the black people of India are mentioned as brutes. Okay, they show us as very powerful people, which we are, like undefeatable, powerful people in the south that they couldn't defeat, but they always show us as demons. So the vilification of the black people has always been a cultural thing for the Aryans to do, even before the colonialists arrived. So this is actually in the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, it mentions about Ram, who is a prince from the north, who travels all across India to fight a war in Lanka with the dark-skinned asuras, the demons. So we're all called demons. And there's another story about them coming to Kerala and defeating the Asura king, the demon king in Kerala. by treachery, of course. They never do a direct war. In all of the wars, if you look at Ramayana, it was when Ravana was turned around. Ravana is the demon king, obviously a black person with enormous strength. So when he turned around, he was shot from the back, not from the front, from the back. And if you look at Kerala, the story in Kerala where the demon king was defeated, it's a similar story of treachery. This is a subject that we could do in another episode, but this is how they showcase us in their scriptures. They showcase the southern people as demons, not as humans, because we're dark-skinned.
Okay, so before colonialism, the Northerners were colorist against the Southerners already. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. They've always been color prejudiced.
I see. So this precedes colonialism by the British.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, did the colorism set in the South? Did that set in the South before colonialism, or did it come in after colonialism, or is it still being resisted to this day? What is the attitude today towards race and color in the South, and when did it start?
In the South, you're talking specifically about the South or the whole of India?
Oh no, I mean in the South. You explained that in the North they were colorists from the beginning or from before colonialism. But now what I mean is specifically in the South, what is their attitude towards skin color, and when did that attitude begin?
So it starts getting a little complex now, okay? So let me explain. When the Aryans came to India with their new religion and their new language, they were really white people, right? But they started mixing with the blacks. And you know the uniqueness of the black gene is that it darkens even the whitest people, right? So the people, when they started mixing with the black women, the Aryans, when they started mixing with the black women, they started getting darker. So only in certain parts of India do you see the actual Aryans. If you go to maybe in Kashmir, have you heard of Kashmir? I'm sure you have. So in Kashmir, you see Aryans. You see people who closely resemble Europeans. And in certain parts of North India, you'll find them. But even the fairest person in North India would, in other parts of North India, would have a slight hue of brown in them, right? So colorism, even though encoded as a rule in their texts, was promoted by brown people. These texts were not seen in that context till maybe, very late in the 18th to 19th to 20th centuries, when thinkers actually started thinking on a colorism basis. So this was subtle, very subtle. It was already written in all the texts that black people in the South were demons, but the North Indians who promoted this idea themselves were dark people. You understand me? You kind of get me now.
Yes.
It's a very complex subject. So it's like the pot calling the kettle black. You understand?
All puns
saying?
intended.
Yeah. So you still see black people in North India, but they're actually mixed with the Aryans. But the mixing, the white gene is not superior enough to turn black people into whites. It doesn't work that way.
It's not dominant.
When white people, it's not dominant. Yeah. So when white people mix with black women, especially, they get black kids. They don't get white kids. But when a black man mixes with a white woman, he gets black kids. So the black gene always shows, right? So mixing never helped them dominate the country based on color. But it already, it was codified in their text that black was bad. So they didn't know what they were doing, but their texts were already like brainwashing and programming them to think that black people were demons.
Okay, all right. So but then again, in the South, are you saying that these ideas penetrated the South in the 18 and the 1900s?
the idea to look at the scriptures as a source of the discrimination, like that must have come in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, when people started getting Western education and started understanding how programming works, how these subtle things are worked into society, that black is bad, white is good. All this terminology, all these ideas must have come in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. Before this, people were just oblivious to that. We knew that the texts, the Hindu texts, predominantly mention gods or the learned and the supreme people as white and the demons as black. It was always like that in their texts, but it was not actually brought into literature that this was a kind of mental slavery or a means to mentally oppress people. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. I see. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah.
So it was in the text, but it wasn't.
People
Yeah,
didn't
I
figure
see.
it out.
Okay, they didn't think about it until the 18th and 19th century under colonial rule.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right, and then so could you tell us something about the Dalit people then? Because you said that they
Oh
were the
yeah.
ones that are the exception as not geographically per se, because I know they're in different areas, but you said that as far as the culturally, that was the major exception. So could you
Yeah.
please tell my audience about them?
Yeah, yeah, I will. So, in the first part of our podcast, we discussed about the BLM and how BLM is actually triggering a lot of similar movements across the world, especially in India. So, the black people of America have actually inspired the black people in India more than what the media will show you, more than what the popular narratives will let you know, because these kind of movements don't get the coverage that they need to, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So while the subcontinent is infamous among Africans for its anti-blackness, you would never know that Dalits tried to mimic black movements for their liberation throughout the decades. So in 2020, the black people in India, the Dalits in India, are actually finding that a movement similar to BLM within India could give them more hope to gain the kind of rights that all people should have, that should be a normal for all people. Like, you don't have rights for certain people and no rights for another set of people in the same country. But this is what the Dalit people are put through.
Okay, so
Have you read about this?
so are the Dalit people right now aware of the George Floyd protest at this point?
They were always aware. That is the surprising part. The Dalits always read about black liberation movements. So let me just give you an example of the Dalit Panthers movement. Have you heard that word before? Dalit Panthers. Does it resemble something else?
I read about that, but the truth is I didn't have a lot of details in front of me when I read it because I was in college, and at that time there weren't websites or articles available. Actually, it was somebody that told me about it, but you know what? Now's a great time for us to learn more.
So the Dalit Panthers movement was modeled on the Black Panthers movement after the leaders of the Dalit Panthers read about the US Black Panthers in the Time magazine. So the founders of the DPM, or the Dalit Panthers movement, were Namdeo Dasal, Raja Dhale, J.V. Pawar, and Arun Kamble. They were poets and writers. So these people wrote anti-establishment poetry and short stories, and published a magazine called Vidroh, and Vidroh means revolt. And DPM also used self-defense in response to atrocities against Dalits. They held election boycotts, they demonstrated against the ruling government, and finally even attacked Hindu deities and protested Dalit caste oppression. So it's very similar to the Black Panthers movement.
So they hit the
You get
idols
that?
too. They were even knocking down the Hindu idols.
Of course, because the Hindu idols, most of them promote the Hindu idea is to block out the Dalits, to keep the Dalits out of the educational scenario, out of the political scenario, out of the economic scenario, so they'll always remain as slaves. So their women are always subjected to being the sexual slaves of the high castes. You'll see that the high castes don't like to touch the Dalit people, right? They're known as the untouchables, and untouchable here doesn't mean like the untouchables in the mafia, like the ones you can't touch, but these are the ones that you're not supposed to touch because they're considered impure or unclean or filthy. That's why you don't touch them. If you touch them, you need to take 7 baths. That's what they say. So, but when it comes to Dalit women, of course, they like to use them as sex slaves. So this is very common in many parts of India, using Dalit women as sex slaves. It's kind of double standard, right? You don't give them rights, but you want their women.
And now, does this go on today, even with the law and order and the police? Are they still doing this now?
Course, it does. It does. So let me tell you a bit more about the Dalit Panthers movement. Just like the U.S. Black Panthers movement, it died down too. So I'll just read out a little bit more about the Dalit Panthers. I have to read because I have to be accurate when it comes to mentioning facts. So the organization, the Dalit Panthers, were founded on May 29, 1972 in the Indian state of Maharashtra. In the heyday of the movement, throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the Dalits were inspired by the Black Panther Party in the US, and a controversy was blazing over one of the founders. The founder, Raja Dale, he wrote an article where he declared a new Independence Day within India. You know that India got its independence on 15th August 1947. Did you know that, right? You already know
Yeah.
that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah? If you didn't, I'm just reminding you. So it's August 15th, 1947 when India got its independence from the British, and Raja Dhale proclaimed a new Independence Day called the Kala Swatantra Din, which translates to Black Independence Day, because obviously the Dalits are black people, so he called it the Black Independence Day 25 years after the actual Independence Day, because he said, from today we did not accept any of the caste-based oppression that you are doing, that you've been subjecting us to for so many centuries, or millennia for that matter, because the Dalits have been undergoing this for thousands of years. So did you know about the Kala Swatantra Din? Of course you would never know about it because it was suppressed, but I'm just asking you in case you read any literature on the internet about this.
There's no way we could have been taught about this in any school that I went to, because to be honest with you, in the U.S., and the people in the chat right now that are in the U.S. can back me up on this. In the U.S., there's no city in which the school system would include this in their standards. And truth be told, if a teacher was to teach something like this, they could get into trouble and get extra scrutinized for it.
Okay.
We got 7 in the chat now, so they'll back me up. Anybody in the chat, if any of you ever heard of the Black Independence Day in India, please put a 2 in the chat. If your teacher would have gotten in trouble for teaching this to you, put a 1 in the chat.
Yeah. So yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
So to tell you more about the Black Independence Day in India, so a year before it was announced, there was a government inquiry into the educational, social, and economic conditions of Dalits. And this government inquiry is very important because it was headed by a Dalit person by the name of L.A. Perumal. L.A. Perumal Committee report on Dalit atrocities found that around 11,000 cases of atrocities nationwide against the Dalits. These are the ones that are reported. There are thousands of reports that do not make it. I mean, thousands of crimes that are not reported. So these 11,000 atrocities, they included 1,177 murders in a single year. In a single year, 1,177 oppression-based murders. Dalit women were being raped, stripped, and paraded naked. Dalit men and women were assaulted for using public water sources. They were whipped for wearing good clothes. They were beaten for wearing slippers. The laborers were intimidated, and the worst human excretions were thrown into the water sources used by the Dalits. These rising atrocities against Dalits made Raja Dhale call for black independence. But given the lack of political power, most Dalits continue to have a very, very degrading, they continue to still do degrading jobs like removing human waste, dead animals, or sweeping streets. Dalits comprise anywhere between 18 to, I think it's more, but the report which I says, it said 18% of the Indian population. I think the majority of India, because they don't want to do a caste-based, that's a funny part, Black Mind, that they don't want to do a caste-based census of India. The government of India, which is run by the upper castes, are strongly opposed to carrying out a caste-based census, which would actually give the numbers of the Dalits, which I think is somewhere between 50 to 60% of the total population. We are made to think that we are a minority within India. The Dalit people are taught to think that they're only 18%. But wherever you look, you see a Dalit. Wherever you look, wherever you go in India, you see a Dalit. But the Brahmins are like 5 to 3%. The people who run the country are like 3 to 5% of the population. And Dalits, who should ideally, in my imagination, represent 50 to 60% of the population, they're being told that they're 18% of the population. And they face ongoing segregation. Just like the segregation in the blacks faced in the 60s and 70s, we face segregation in schools, restaurants. There's systemic police violence, sexual violence, and even lack of access to drinking water. So going back to the DPM movement and how it died, so in 1973, DPM published a manifesto that integrated Marxist capitalist exploitation with Buddhism, identifying Dalit enemies as landlords, capitalists, moneylenders, and government controlled by ruling castes. They also expanded the term Dalits to include other oppressed people such as the low scheduled castes, neo-Buddhists, landless and poor peasants, and exploited women. The notoriety of DPM's poems, short stories, and street protests led to the rapid growth over 30 loosely organized groups of DPM in Mumbai. That's just one city. And in 1974, the DPM leaders Dasal and Dhale disagreed about having a Marxism-Buddhism ideology versus a strictly Buddhist ideology. Outside pressures on DPM included intense police surveillance, and the government of India declared a state of emergency from 1975 to 1977. So if you didn't know what the state of emergency was, it is a special state of political limbo where elections are suspended and civil liberties are curbed. So going back, on March 7th, 1977, Dasal and Pawar, two of the founders of the DPM, announced its dissolution as a result of infighting and political repression. As with all movements for the disadvantaged people, this too came to an end. So why do you think, Shiny Black, is that whenever a movement is started by the oppressed and disadvantaged, we always end up hijacking our own movements to the point where it's dissolved. I don't see this happening to the oppressors. When the oppressors are organized, they're organized. They never get dissolved. But when we start a movement to counter oppression, we always end up infighting and then finally dissolving our own movement.
You know, man, it's funny you ask me that because I've always been telling my own people that we're not the only, see, African Americans tend to think that we're the only people that ever start bickering with each other and can't agree on stuff. This is what we think about ourselves. And I've been telling African Americans and even other people of African descent in other countries that it's not just black folks. It's not just folks of African descent in Africa and the United States that get to fighting with each other. Apparently, this is going on in India too, from what you told me. And so we have this idea that everybody from India is very united, that all people from India are united with each other and they don't have any kind of rifts between them. This is a mistake that we oftentimes make. But when it comes to hijacking the movements, the thing is, we're not really the ones doing it. You know, people that need liberation don't have the ability to hijack it themselves. If we can hijack somebody else's movement, then we're not the ones that are in need of the liberation. You got to have resources and less restrictions to be able to take someone else's movement and hijack it for yourself. So if you say hijack the movement, that's something somebody else would have to do. But if you mean to dissolve it or something, then yeah, you know, oppressed people have to fight over bones because the oppressors already stole the meat. And I guess it can lead to that kind of squabbling. I mean, you said they were arguing over whether they were going to mix Marxism and Buddhism. And right now, to be honest with you, we're in an argument over how much you can compare homosexuality to blackness in the United States. So take, for instance, the Black Lives Matter. There's the slogan and then there's the organization. So when it became a slogan, a lot of us didn't know that the organization with the same name was set up to promote gay and lesbian advancements. And this is on their mission statement, but a lot of us just weren't aware. And now they're doing it at the expense of the black movement. And I'm saying that because what I found out was that yesterday on Facebook, two people that don't know each other, I know them and I know they don't know each other. Two people that don't know each other put out a status that said Black trans lives matter. Now they did this on the same day. So this means that somebody's giving instructions. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
All right. So they're giving these instructions. And so what's going on is that some of the homosexual men and women that are black are blaming the wider black community for not sticking up for them and for transgender black people who get murdered. But the thing is, most of us aren't aware of this being a pattern to begin with, that they're targeted or anything. I mean, we're not being negligent. We just really don't hear anything about this kind of pattern. I can't even prove that it is a pattern, to be honest with you. But we already told the white masses that we would not accept them using black on black crime as an excuse for police to murder us under the same conditions in which they'll take a white guy in alive and he just committed a mass shooting. So because of this, we can't use a pattern that we aren't sure even exists or not to detract from the issue that we know does exist. But that's exactly what they're telling us to do. And so they're trying to steal some of that momentum to put behind an agenda that was meant to reduce our population and emasculate the men. And the other instance is this. See, there's COINTELPRO in the United States, and that was actually an FBI operation that was a conspiracy theory for years, and then it became declassified, and it was proven to be a reality. They actually did it, but it was exposed a long time ago. They declassified it in the 1990s, but it was exposed during the Vietnam War when a bunch of white college students were protesting the war in Chicago, and they stormed the FBI field office. The FBI agents decided to flee because they weren't going to shoot up a bunch of white kids, but they left classified documents open on the desk, and that's how it got exposed. So what I'm saying is that apparently the same playbook is happening around the world, where these guys, they got into a debate and they bickered about an ideology. And black folks in the States go through something similar where somebody will forge letters and get them to start arguing and bickering over things so that the movements can't stay together. COINTELPRO worked against the Black Panther Party, and apparently something like this worked in India against the Dalit Panther movement. That's what it seems like. I
Didn't
hope that
Spike
answers the
Lee
question.
already make a movie? Didn't Spike Lee already make a movie about this expose, the FBI declassification of that operation?
I'm not sure if he made a movie about that one or not. I have to look up a list because he's made a number of films, and sometimes a movie comes out and I find out later that he was one of many directors. But I know he touched on it in the Malcolm X movie. I don't remember if he was involved in the movie Panther or not. I can't remember who the director was, but they do touch on federal government and local government's covert involvements in these movements. They don't just leave it off, and it's a touched on subject. And he may not have. I'm sure he's not the only. If he did it, he's not the only director that touched on that.
Yeah, that's how they do things, right? They bring our own kind to come and hijack our own movements. Like now, I don't understand why the black homosexuals and the black sexual minorities have to become a subset and challenge the wider BLM movement. It doesn't make any sense. Divide and conquer, right? That's how they do it. And we're gullible enough to fall for it. That's the funniest part.
Well, that's because as Black folks, we don't generally put race first, and we haven't really had to do so. I mean, like you said, in Southern India, you speak 4 languages. That means that there's diversity just in the southern half of your country alone. And I know Sri Lanka next door, even though it's another country, I know that the genetic stock is very similar, but they speak, I think Sinhalese is one language, and I don't remember what the name of the other one is. And so what it is that we as Black folks, we look at other races and we see a different kind of person. Other races look at us and then they realize that they're a race. They become conscious of race when they look at us. We don't necessarily do that. So we're used to our own diversity. So we're used to human diversity. Other people are not necessarily that way. I mean, every time someone is lighter than us and they look at us and they first see us, they seem to be surprised, like they never came from us in the first place. So, I mean, as you said, you actually answered this when you said that the Aryans went in, whether they settled or conquered, when they went into the subcontinent, it was mostly Aryan men that were moving into the subcontinent, and they were marrying Dravidian women. And they realized that the kids were not looking like the dads. They were looking like a mix of the mom and the dad, but the kids were not recognizable as Aryans anymore. So if the kids had been taken back to that area region at that point, then their own grandparents would not have recognized them. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And so they had to come up with this caste system to try to freeze the mixing, where they try to freeze it beyond progressing any further, so that whatever areas were. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep. No. That is a very logical explanation. Yes, go ahead.
Well, that's really all it is. It's just at the end of the day, people, for whatever reason, they're afraid of disappearing. We're not even thinking about race until someone mentions it, at least historically speaking. We have to be forced to think about it, Other people look at us and they start thinking about it. And so let alone when they realize that they still can't keep their hands off of our women, or that women can't keep their hands off of our men, then that's when they really start thinking about it, because they realize they're going to vanish. And so that might very well be what it is. It's just they have this fear of vanishing. And maybe that may be the reason why they seem to be divided. But I'll let you in on the secret too. And that is that these other groups of people are not that united. They're just united when Black folks walk in. Yep. That's all that is. They're not really united. Yep. And so, exactly. You know, these Indo-Aryans in the North, if they are the ones that have the colorism issue, and it's only their elites that really have it as part of their religion. The truth be told, see, when you walk in a room as a Southerner, they may, that's when they may seem to be all together. But if you're not in the room and you leave a bug in the room, that's when you'll find out what their divisions are. They have them. They just don't let us know so that we can't exploit it. Whereas in our cases, we're used to diversity, so we're not trying to hide our divisions from them. We'll openly say, well, oh yeah, I don't agree with him about this. Even if we like someone, we still don't mind telling someone of another background that we disagree with so and so of our same background. And consequently, what we will tell them as a regular mundane fact, they will not tell us, and they will use when we tell them in order to divide. Because if they keep us busy with each other, then of course there'll always be some numbers of them, not only in existence but also having more resources. And so, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that's what they did. That's what they did to the Dalits, right? So the Dalits in India are divided among scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They don't call them entirely as Dalits. They've been divided into several tribes and castes so that they'll never be united, right? There'll always be bickering amongst these tribes and castes. So they've ensured the division within the massive division. Like they already created a big division called the Dalits, and then they created subdivisions so that they'll never unite. But do you think an economic, if economic freedom and political representation can actually help disadvantaged communities come out of the systemic cycle of oppression and fear?
I wish, man. And I want to hear your thoughts after. I'm going to hear your own opinion on the same question, but I wish that it was really that simple. But see, it depends on how you get it, because it's not so bad when you move up on your own and you just kind of grow an economy. But you have to keep this in mind. And I'm going to tell you, because even though your situation is several thousands of years old, and ours is about maybe 450 years old, 400 years old in North America, maybe 500 years old in the Americas as a whole. Our situation is like this.
When did slavery end? When did slavery end?
Well, see, it goes beyond slavery, but in the United States, it ended in 1865, and in Brazil, it ended in 1888. Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery in the Americas.
But it went on for 400 years, right?
Just chattel slavery, not necessarily just chattel slavery. That started, let's see, in Africa itself, it started before they went to the Americas, but it was only the Portuguese that were involved in it. And they were taking people pretty much back into Portugal and some of the islands off the coast of Africa that weren't inhabited, like take, for instance, Rio Muni Island and Cape Verde, Sao Tome. But for the most part, as far as in the Americas, I think it started, let's see, by 1522, they had already started with African slavery. They started enslaving the original Americans from the time that they landed. Columbus's second voyage, they were already, when he got back to the Americas the second time, they were already enslaving the Indians looking for gold. And that was, so that would have been, they started in 1492, really, started enslaving the Tainos. And they kept on doing it until 1865 and 1888 in the U.S. and in Brazil. Mexico got rid of its slavery in 1828. And I'm not sure about every other country, but the thing is this: you're dealing with maybe a 3,000-year-old system of oppression over there where you are, and we're dealing with a system
we still have slavery. It's just not written in paper. It's just not. You don't have slave markets here. Just that people are born into the caste and they're automatically categorized as slaves. They're already slaves when they're born. You don't need to have a market for them. You just come and tell them, do all this work. Why? Because you're born into this caste. That's why. That's the only answer you'll get.
So it's not legal slavery, but it's de facto slavery, you mean?
It's de facto, yes. It's part of society. Nobody challenges it. You can't challenge it in court. You can't challenge it through police. The cops themselves, they're from the upper castes. The Dalits, they're not intelligent enough to educate themselves and get into the police force. They don't get into the military. They don't get into government services, even though there's a lot of reservation. Have you heard of reservation? It's something called, like, you could easily get into jobs in the government sector. You could easily get into educational institutions, but they've created a systemic oppression within all these institutions that the Dalit people can never get in.
So legally, even if there's a space reserved for them, they will be harassed out of the position. Is that what you mean?
Yep, they will be. There are people
Okay, all right.
there are people committing suicide. There are kids who end their lives after getting into universities and then becoming a part of the systemic abuse. I could give you links about it. We could talk about that in the next show.
Wow. I guess I better I might have to take an antidepressant beforehand. I'll see if I can get a doctor to prescribe one for that before we start that show. I'm joking about the antidepressant, but I'm sure that that's going to be a depressing one, but we may have to cover it. There's no reason not to, really, because you do have, I mean, legally speaking, you have affirmative action in the United States where as long as there are applicants for the position, they've got to they have to give some minority applicants a shot. And what they do, though, is, and that's another story, but what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, we're going to look specifically, if we're going to take someone black, it's going to be a lady, not a man, because then we can fill two quotas with one body and for one salary. But then also, of course, they just don't want a bunch of heterosexual black men running around with salaries. But it seems like what's going on in that case is a bit more entrenched. And I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to answer your question because of what you said about the economic freedom and political representation. If what you're dealing with is actual, if what you all are dealing with is a white mindset over there, like what we're dealing with, then even if you were to start your economic freedom, it's more important to have weapons first and then an economy. You need both, but it would be more important to have the weapons first, because we went that route in the States. We went the economic route. When slavery ended, we started to build our own communities. And in New York City, even before slavery was over, we had one called Seneca Village. Seneca Village got bulldozed. It's now Central Park in Manhattan. And that was not that was probably one case. But after slavery, when we built up other communities, they got burned down by force. And this happened over 250 times in the South alone. I can't even remember all the cases. Rosewood, Florida is famous. Greenville, Oklahoma, right next to Tulsa, is famous. I think Wilmington, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, was another famous one. There was one in next to Opelousas, Louisiana. I forgot the name of it, but it was a black settlement.
Where was Black Wall Street? Where was that?
That was Greenville, Oklahoma, right next to Tulsa. That's the most famous one because that was the first time a city in the world, the first time a city got bombed from the air. That was Greenville, Oklahoma. The governor called in.
Even before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Yeah, even before that. Yeah, that city got bombed from the air. The bomb was not an atomic bomb, fortunately, but it was still bombed from the air. And so at that point, it was pretty much crude. They had to have someone to fly over it and then light a fuse and just dump it off the side and drop it onto the city. But that was the first time that it happened. And it started simply because this town was doing okay. They were doing financially well. And Tulsa next door was, I guess, normal as far as white towns go. But one day a black man bumped into a white lady in the elevator, and that just set off a riot. And the reason they only needed that excuse because they were already angry that black folks in Black Wall Street were doing well. They used to take vacations to Paris from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Where was this? When was this?
I forgot the exact decade. I can't remember the exact decade. It was between it was either the 20s, 30s, or 40s.
Okay. Wow.
But it shouldn't be in the 40s though. But yeah, that was the famous one. It wasn't the only one, but that was the most famous. And the second most famous is Rosewood, Florida, and that one got burned down because of the same thing. A white woman said that a black man beat her, and so they tore that town down. And so what I'm saying is that if the Dalit are going to develop their own economies, and I noticed something about the jobs that you mentioned, every job you mentioned was not only a rough job, but it's also a physically dirty job. Yeah. I noticed that. where you have a high chance of getting infected if you have any open wounds on your body, for instance.
Yes.
So
That's what they
if
want
you,
us to. They want us to die from these kind of the professions themselves.
okay, in that case, then understand when y'all do start going into jobs that are cleaner. I'm not saying don't try to do it. I'm just saying that one of the first things you all will have to have is weapons. Because if not, if there's a community of these people that are in these castes that nobody else can respect, then when y'all start to develop, just keep in mind that they're going to come with the weapons and they're going to start burning stuff down.
Of course, there'll be riots and stuff, but the thing is, in India, gun ownership isn't legal, right? You could have a gun if you have a valid reason. You need to get a court order showing that you have a bona fide reason to keep a gun. So only after you get the permission from the relevant authorities can you buy a gun. And even if you buy a gun, you need to account for the number of bullets that you buy for your gun. Like if you have a few bullets missing, you'll be called to account, because every few days, I don't know exactly how many days, but every few days, the address where you're registered to, you're linked to a police station, and then you have to take your gun and your ammunition and get them counted and sorted. Like you need to register it. Like I've got a gun and 7 bullets or 8 bullets or whatever. And if there are a few missing bullets, then you have to answer for it. Do you understand?
Okay.
So you can't buy them off the counter like in the U.S. You can't just walk into a shop and then buy an AR-15, which I would have loved to own, but you can't do that in India, because if you start doing that, I think there will be a couple of million deaths every month.
Well, there could be. I mean, I'm sure you already have a crowded situation, so even a low crime rate, still a lot of people. But
Yeah.
When I say the weapons, it's not only guns I'm referring to.
Okay.
It's not just that. I just mean anything. Like when they go on riots, what weapons do they use? You got to have the same ones then.
They use swords and sticks and pitchforks, like in the medieval times. That's what they use. But they're very organized. They use Molotov cocktails as well, and burning tires, petrol bombs. They use whatever they can find. So what I'm trying to tell you is, myself, I started learning the oppressor's martial art, that is Krav Maga. Krav Maga is, I think you know already, but I'm just going to tell it if somebody doesn't know, is the Israeli martial art. So I started learning the Israeli martial art. So when an Israeli or an Israeli trained enemy is going to come at you, you need to know exactly what they're going to do next, right? So I started practicing the martial art myself. So that's where you start. You start learning martial arts. You start training your kids. You don't train them up to be what do you call it? Pacifists. You tell them you be pacifist with those who want peace, with those who want to obstruct your freedom, to obstruct your rights. You don't have to act as a pacifist, though we're ideally asked to do so. In an oppressive society, it's never ever going to bring you results. As the Prophet ﷺ said, always negotiate from a position of power. Never negotiate with the enemy when you're weak with them, because they're going to take away your rights. It's only normal. So when you're in an equal position, or when you're in a position that you're already more powerful than them, then they give you the terms that you want. And as Muslims, we are sure that we'll never oppress another community like they would like to oppress us. We would never do it to them. That's a quality that only Muslims have.
Most of the time, there are going to be a few other people, but in mass, we're the ones that are generally afraid to commit oppression of somebody else, because we expect it to happen to us if we do it. But nonetheless, we're going to have to be careful to defend anything that we do build, and whatever weapons rioters have, we would have to be sure to have those weapons as well. Now, the thing is this, if Dalits are going to build something of their own and try to set up another economy, the first thing that they would need would be shelter and weapons. Those would be the first things. And it's better that the people around don't necessarily know exactly which weapons they have, because the first time that people come and riot, and that's going to happen at some point, I just don't know when, but the first time people come and riot, you have to be able to take them by surprise. So, in other words, you don't just need to have the pitchforks and the weapons that they have. But if you know Krav Maga, you would have to make sure that there are enough men who know Krav Maga as well, so that when rioters come in, you can disarm them and stick them with their own pitchforks and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to
also owning these kind of country weapons or these traditional weapons is actually a crime in India. You can't keep them in your homes, right? So what I would advise is that whenever there's a street full of Dalits, at least start a training center for martial arts where you could keep all these weapons and tell the cops it's just for training, it's just for practice, not for actually using it on someone. This would be the right way to do it.
Okay, fair enough. And you especially got to teach them how to teach the disarming techniques as well.
Of course.
And I mean, yeah, you know how to beat that system there. You understand it better than we do. I just know that you have to prepare for that kind of mentality, that riot mentality. And so now, what do you think? Do you think that economic freedom and political representation is going to make a big difference?
Just like blacks and Dalits, I think we're both in the same situation, right? It's like a systemic cycle that you can't get out of. So you just can't get out of. See, let me tell you. Let me put it this way. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. What I believe is that you don't need to be highly educated to be successful in business. You just need a good mentor to leapfrog through all the stages in business. So the business starts up, you start making some revenue, then you expand, you do linear integration, you do vertical integration. So what I mean with integration is like, do you kind of get it when I talk about integration in business terms? Do you understand it, or do I have to explain that as well? What do you think?
I have a vague understanding. I don't have the details you do, but I've got a vague understanding.
Okay. So for example, if you're talking about linear or horizontal integration, it works like this. You start off as a retailer of a certain product, then you move up and become a wholesaler, and then you become a master distributor, and you become a countrywide distributor. This is how you do horizontal integration. So vertical integration would be like expanding your product range. So if you're doing A and product A is used along with product B, then you integrate product B into your supply chain and you grow. So these integrations only come when you're mentored, right? Even educated people don't know how to do business. So business is something that is blessed by Allah Himself. So I don't think that business actually needs a lot of intelligence like it's made out to be. Like they say, Harvard graduates make the best businessmen. I don't know. They have this kind of saying, Stanford, Harvard, all these people produce the best economists. They produce economists. They produce workers. They don't produce business leaders. Look at Jeff Bezos. He didn't go to these universities. Look at Bill Gates. He didn't go to any of these universities. Look at Warren Buffett. He didn't go to any of these universities. But now they're actually taking classes at these universities. They do visiting seminars at these universities. They're not educated. They're dropouts. They worked out from their garages. They couldn't afford to own a business, but still they kept at it and became successful. This is what I'm saying, that it is possible to achieve economic success, but you need a mentor. You need somebody to guide you. You need unified support from the community. What Black people lack, and the same thing that Dalits here lack as well, and Muslims in general lack, is that when a Muslim starts a business, you're supposed to give discounts to all the Muslims, just like blacks. Like if a black person is selling a product for a high price, for example, the other black people think that, oh, why is it so expensive with you? I'll go get it from the white guy for $10 less. Give that $10 to your brother. Let him grow. Let him expand his business. The white people already have everybody else's business. Why would you want to give him yours as well? So economic sense has to be taught at the home. And there has to be a mentorship program to teach people how to do business. This is the only way to come out of the cycle. So what I'm trying to say is, even if you're underprivileged, disadvantaged, uneducated, you can still do business. Most of the successful businessmen are dropouts, are failures in life. Whenever they tried to do other stuff, they failed. You look at Jack Ma, you look at Elon Musk, they all had humble beginnings. They're not super intelligent, they're not super educated. Maybe you'll find a few of them have gone to a university and actually got a bachelor's or a master's degree. The people that Stanford, Harvard, and the top universities in India even produce are workers. They have worker mentalities. They'll work for you. Even if you're uneducated, you could hire a CEO or a CFO who's from Stanford, who's from Harvard, or who's from the top universities in India. This is how you do business. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, do you think that you will be doing more shows about economic freedom and maybe or maybe not political representation? But do you think you'll be doing more shows about economic freedom for Dalit people?
Dalit and black people. Why not? Why not for my black brothers and sisters? I would love to help them out. Yes, I am qualified to talk about economics because I've been in business for a very long time, for at least 20 years now. So I could help people set up businesses, set up supply chains, understand the goals and aspects of business marketing, how to close a sale. I could do all this for them. So I could speak more about economic success, but political representation is an entirely different ballgame. I don't know anything about politics. So we need to find someone qualified enough to teach our people how to move politically. But I would have the resources to teach people more about how they can achieve economic success, so that they would have a different level, a more powerful position to bargain for their rights in society.
Well, as far as politics go, I know more about politics than I do about business, and I'm not an expert in either one. But I can say this, though. When it comes down to politics, the group that has the most influence in the states does not necessarily have the most political representatives, but what they have is the strongest lobby. And their lobby is built on not only campaign contributions, but they're also built on dossiers or files that they keep on people. And so on one hand, you can get a campaign contribution if you're willing to play ball with them. And they lobby both political parties. They don't have any party loyalty. This particular group that's got the most political influence has no loyalty to either one of the two parties in the states. They simply have the money to make contributions, and they also have files on people. So if they don't have dirt on you, they'll just make it up. But one way or another, they're going to make you look bad. And so it may be that the best businesses to go into would be both journalism, whatever skills anybody has, but then also journalism as well. Because a particular group in the States, they have access to journalism. So if you don't play ball with them, they're going to make you look like you're insane. And that's what they did to a representative in Georgia named Cynthia McKinney. They made her look like she was insane. They were able to pay the right people to get that done. So if you get business together, as well as having a way to defend yourself, then it may be that the politics can take care of themselves. And I notice in Malaysia, the Chinese don't have political power. They have financial power, but there are certain rules that are just never passed because they're not even worried about politics. They say, look, we'll make this money and we'll pay the politician to do what we want them to do.
Yep, exactly. That's what the
It's-
Chinese do in the Philippines as well. That's what the Chinese do in Indonesia. That's what the Chinese do in Vietnam, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong. That's how they manipulate the system, right? Before Hong Kong was a territory of China, was a territory of UK, but everywhere this is how the Chinese play. They just focus on getting the economic power. Even in India, certain minorities that are economically empowered have a sway over government policy. They can actually influence government policy. I'm not talking about the upper caste Hindus who are predominantly who've traditionally held power. I'm talking about certain Muslim minorities in India, certain backward communities in India that have managed to become economically successful and now are able to dictate their terms to the government. That's like the Prophet always said. It's just like what I said before. When you're in a position of power, you get to dictate the terms of your treatment or your treaty with the other communities. If you're not in a position of power, you're not in a position to negotiate.
okay. Well, in that case, then like maybe we'll just have to focus on the money. Then I'd hate to think of it that way, but it just may be. It may be the only way. So that we can then have, because it sounds like this particular minority that you're talking about, it sounds like they have lobbying power, that they're utilizing the lobby in order to get what they want,
Yep. Yes.
which
Yes.
is
They're very
which is
organized. They're very organized, but they
okay.
represent less than 1%. They're not even 1% of the population of India. I don't know. They're very little in number. Very little in number, but they're rich. So they are one community. They always act as one. They never have infighting, and they ensure all their economic resources are utilized for their own betterment. And I'll tell you something else. They're building their own city in India. This particular minority, is building their own city where all the houses will only belong to them, all the businesses will only belong to them, and they're building it in India. And they're not a Hindu minority.
Okay, and yet they're going to have everybody in one particular town belonging. Yeah, everybody in one town belonging to their own group, huh?
Yeah. And the
Ooh.
city is not gonna look like a shanty town. It is a world class city. It's going to be a major financial hub. Millions or billions of dollars is going to flow through that hub. It's a township within a major city. So the city of Mumbai, right? Mumbai is the financial capital of India. So a part of Mumbai, they've purchased land for exorbitant amounts. That is, they paid for land more than what you would pay for in New York. That's the amount of money that they've paid. More than a square foot that you would pay in New York, they've paid to buy this land, but they don't care. They want to build their own township within this, and it's going to be a financial and economic hub for these people. It's just not going to be somewhere where they live, but somewhere where they route all the money through, or somewhere where they do all their economic activity through.
Okay,
I
so they're
can
going to
see
build their own
Artzuk.
city.
I can see Artzuk agrees with me that in China, a lot of Chinese bribe the government. Yes, I am aware of this. I am aware of their influence in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, he's in Indonesia, but yeah, he said a lot of them they'll bribe the government and get what they want.
Yep.
And so I guess being an Indonesian politician may be a profitable business in and of itself. But and the thing is, they don't worry about holding political power. That's not their main concern. They pretty much say, well, we don't even have to worry about that. We'll make the money, and we'll make sure nobody else makes it. And I went to Langkawi before, And I could tell you that the Chinese have they've taken the business in Langkawi, and the people have complained. They've said that they have to sell alcohol on behalf of these bosses.
Hmm.
That's what they'll
Yep.
tell you, that they don't
Yep.
really have a choice because they don't own the businesses. They don't want to sell alcohol, but the ones who
Yes.
do own the businesses, they won't sell
Yes.
alcohol. They'll sell whatever they can
Yes.
sell. And
Yes.
so as employees, they got to sit up there and sell the alcohol. They got to sell the pork. Uh,
Yep.
and so there's one last thing I will say about business, though. Uh, and that is this. If you do the show, and this is the reason I ask you about you doing more shows about it. If you do your more shows about economic freedom and doing well in business, keep in mind that the system that was set up for us to be poor is also set up for the Dalits to be poor over there. So there's no way that the Dalit or the African American communities or really any black population anywhere, Dalit or anywhere else, is going to all of a sudden be financially free after being systematically impoverished. I'm sure it will take a lot of time. So understand that when you start talking about this, that's when people target you for death. They did that with Malcolm because he said that they owed us reparations and they owed us damages. And then they shot Martin Luther King Jr. when he said, "What about that check you owe us?" So just keep that in mind. I mean, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s widow, said that they killed him when he started talking about money and financial equality. And so I'm not saying that your idea is not a good idea. I'm just saying that you have to prepare for them to come after you because the ones that have benefited from not doing the same work but getting all the benefits from this work, they're going to do what they can to keep it. And rich people never let you just vote them out of their wealth. So yeah, if you do the shows, that's fine. Just take extra security precautions. That's all.
Of course.
So
In order for the black people to succeed in the USA, they have to take Malcolm as their imam. Malcolm has to be the imam of the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't accept any other imam for the movement except Malcolm X. He's the only one to follow. I only agree with his ideals. I mean, Martin Luther King may have got a few points right, but Malcolm had it 100% right. He had the right perspective, the right drive, and the right way to do it. That's why they took him out first.
yeah, they did go after him first. He started off talking about what they owed, while he said that we should do for ourselves, and he wasn't the only one to say that. But while he said we should do for ourselves, he also talked about what we were owed, and they got him first. And if you want Malcolm to be the imam or to be the leader, I'm not against it because he's certainly a hell of an example, and people should study his life. The thing is that he's not with us anymore, and so we would have to have a leader that would take, or actually leaders. We would need leaders that would take up where he left off. And the ironic thing is that the Black Panther Party said that they were trying to do that they were trying to take up where he left off. So the Dalit Panther Party over there was doing, that means that they were doing the same thing. They were trying to take up where he left off by extension. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And so Malcolm may need to be known about. And I'll ask you this question, and I can't think of any other questions after I ask you this question I'm going to ask. After this one, you can ask me whatever you want. But I understand Gandhi, and I know who he was, and everybody's heard about Gandhi. But Gandhi was nonviolent. He believed in the civil disobedience, and apparently that's where MLK got it from. And he used it as a tactic. But who was the Indian equivalent of Malcolm X? Because there's no way the British would have listened to somebody like Gandhi if there was not a worse option.
So there's a lot of controversy surrounding Gandhi. So when he started off, he was extremely racist. He came from the most racist part of India. He came from North India. So even though he's looked ugly as hell, he thought black people were uglier than him.
Mm.
Uh, And if you look at earlier photos of Gandhi, you'll understand what I mean. He was literally the living example for ugly. But then when he came to India, he reformed. He saw the struggles of the Dalit people and he changed himself, and he understood that, okay, everybody needs rights. But he also ensured a new kind of cycle where the Dalits couldn't come out of. Like he ensured there would be reservation and stuff. So if you're asking me for an equivalent of Malcolm X, that would be Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the primary author of the Indian Constitution. So Gandhi blackmailed Ambedkar into giving up many of the policies and many of the rights that he was aiming to give to empower Dalits in India. Uh, so Gandhi succeeded in blackmailing Ambedkar to give up his drive, his ideas to write in policies into the constitution that will give Dalits more power and more political representation. So Gandhi did play the caste card when it was needed, but you know, like many people of his time, he was a complex personality. There's a lot of accusations going on around about him, but the thing is, the Muslims in India loved him, the Hindus in India loved him, the Dalits loved him, the Brahmins loved him. He was lovable. Everybody liked him. Initially he was a racist, he was a horrible person, but then as time passed, he progressed and he became someone better. But Ambedkar is the only famous guy that I could think of that you could actually find material to read on. There are others though, but those don't have many material that you could research on. But Ambedkar is somebody that you could start researching on, and you could research the leaders of the Dalit Panthers movement.
All right. Now, did I spell Ambedkar's name correctly in the chat?
Yeah, you should replace the T with a D. Ambedkar.
Okay, gotcha.
And
All
then
right. Okay,
he is
cool.
the man, the Malcolm of India.
Okay, all right. Now, was Ambedkar Muslim or was he Hindu?
No. So he was born Dalit, right? That's why he spoke about Dalit rights, but he was extremely educated, countering the fact that, countering the long-going myth that Dalits are too stupid to study. Where have you heard that before, right? Haven't you heard that in the
Yeah.
US? Huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's the same in India. So they say you Dalits are too stupid to study anyways. So Ambedkar was so educated that he wrote practically the whole Constitution of India. The whole Constitution of India was written by him. He did have a few assistants, but practically he wrote the whole thing. So he was that well educated and well traveled and a visionary. In fact, many of the freedoms that we enjoy in India today, many of the rights that we enjoy in India today, it's all Ambedkar's vision. Without Ambedkar, we would never have India. So when he started off, he was a Dalit, but he said Hinduism is never going to give you equal freedom. It's never going to treat you as its equal. So you need to either move into atheism, where there's no religion, or move into Buddhism. I think the initial part of his life, he did become Buddhist and then atheist. So they're practically the same thing. Buddhist is just a practicing atheist who has certain things to do, because in Buddhism, in the major ideas of Buddhism, there's no God concept, and also he recommended Islam as a means to come out of oppression, the systemic oppression.
Okay. Ironically, he recommended it and didn't become it, but it may
He
be that
didn't.
you want. Yeah, y'all may need a.
Many visionaries in India did, like Sri Narayana Guru in Kerala. He recommended Islam as a means to come out of oppression as well. Periyar, who was the the Dalit leader from Tamil Nadu recommended Islam as well, but he lived and died an atheist. So many people recommended it. Some people say that when these leaders start recommending Islam, there's a force within the oppressor that actually comes and ends their lives before Islam can be spread through them.
Okay.
Yeah, because Sri Narayana Guru, he died mysteriously as well. Gandhi was reading Gandhi also recommended Islam as a subject to study. Also Ambedkar, he recommended Islam, and Periyar recommended Islam, but these people were never allowed to spread the idea of Islam.
Oh no! I mean, they shot Malcolm about half a year after he said that the solution to America's race problem was in Islam, but the only question would be, could America accept it? And so, he had 6 months left after he said that. So yeah, I mean, it is very true. And as a matter of fact, oftentimes, and many people in my audience think that Islam was a force for oppression and not for liberation. And it's hard to blame them because it's compared to Christianity in many ways. And certainly people twisted Christianity to justify racial oppression. I'm not saying that you could do that in Christianity for real, but people were willing to twist it in order to justify it. And so it seems to them that Islam would be the same thing. But, people that were not Muslim do have a history of saying, no, this is a way to get out of it. This is a way to get to liberate yourself from the oppression. And they don't know about certain things like.
See, the thing is, Islam has the tools, but we're not aware of the tools. Most of us, including me, I don't know about you, but I'm talking about me. We're still not aware of the tools that Islam has to end oppression, because what happened when colonialism took over even most of the Islamic world was that it suppressed these kind of aspects of Islam. It stopped the studying of Islam in that respect, right, as a liberating force, because Islam is a liberating force. In the 160 million Muslims that live in India, that you heard me correctly, 160 million, right? That's a huge number of Muslims that live in India. At least 100 million of them are Dalit.
That's a lot.
And there are entire villages of Dalits coming to Islam even today. I can give you links. I'm not talking conspiracy theories. I'm not shooting blanks. I'm telling you, this is a fact, that there are villages, entire villages, where not even a single da'i, not a single Muslim has gone and taught them about Islam. They're learning it from different sources and converting into Islam. The whole village converts into Islam. This is still happening in India.
Okay. Wow. I see. And so 100 out of 160 million Muslims, 100 million of them are Dalit.
At least. This is
okay.
We don't have the right figures. You know why? Because the government doesn't want us to know our power. They want us to think that we're lesser than we actually are in number. You understand what I mean? They tell us that we're 18 or 20% of the population. You Dalits are like 18 to 20% of the population. I know we're like 50 to 60% of the population. Everywhere you go, you see that Dalit colonies are bigger than the rich people's houses. The Dalits live in shanty towns. They're massive. They have millions and millions of people living in them. We are not the minority. We're 50 to 60% of the population. They don't want to do a caste-based census in India. They don't want us to realize our political might. They don't want to realize that if we join together, we could become an economic force to be reckoned with. They want us to think we're too small and too powerless to solve our own problems.
Southern states have been blamed for the same thing in the United States, southeastern states. There was a move at one point in one of the southern states to change the racial categories from 1/16 of black blood to 1/32 of black blood. One professor at a state university was advocating for that. He was explaining it, and he said that he was fine with it either way. But one of the things he said was, if this happens, understand that most of you at that point, that's the threshold, most of you are going to then have to be reclassified as African American. And so, of course, this measure was defeated in that state's government because a lot of the lawmakers themselves would have had to reclassify themselves as African American. But in many cases, a lot of times in these southern states, there's a speculation that they undercount the African American population. Not in the other parts of the country, but specifically in the Southeast. Because like you said, everywhere you go, you see a Dalit, you don't see someone of a high caste, but they say you're 18%. Well, we're told that we're 13% of the population. We're told that we may be about, let's say 30 to 40% in some of these southern states. Well, actually, I was told 33 in one particular state, but everywhere you go, it's not 13. It's not 33%. That's not what you're going to see. 33% of the people that you see are not going to be the only black folks you see. You're going to see about 1 out of every second person. So you're looking at about half. Ironically, I'm to be honest with you, I'm very shocked by the parallels. And I think a lot of my audience is also shocked because I expected to learn something. But I learned a hell of a lot more today than what I expected to learn. And I'm sure the audience did too. I didn't realize how many Dalit there were. I didn't realize how much the Muslim population the Dalits make up. I wasn't aware of the similarities. I wasn't aware of, I knew there was a Dalit Panther movement, but I didn't know that it was, that they went through so many of the same things. I was under the impression that we were much more different than what we really are.
Now that's the thing about the oppressed people, right? Their stories are almost similar in all the countries. The oppressed people have the same kind of stories to say. So I can see that Artzak is telling us, I hope I said that right. So Artzak is talking about the Papua movement that the Indonesians are busy suppressing. So we should do an episode on that as well, because the Papuans are being oppressed by Indonesians. Ironically, Indonesians shouldn't be doing it because they're Muslim, but they're still doing it because they're thinking like colonialists. We can see Free Will Defender saying in the USA, Hispanics under Caucasian. Yes, because the Caucasians need to feel that they're the majority, or all hell would break loose, right? They would start arming up and shooting at everyone if they start understanding that they're a minority. So, just
what do you
like,
mean would? They've already begun that. They jumped the gun on that just from the election, the first election of Obama.
Yeah,
they've been doing this in stages every time.
But still, they don't kill as much. You don't classify that as genocide. They want to create a cycle of fear. They want black people to think that if you're black and if you're coming into our territory, you're gonna get shot at. You're gonna be killed. So they just want to send out a message. Right now it's just a message. Okay, it's not an actual genocide. Even in India, they're doing the same thing. They want us to feel threatened, so they kill a few people every few months, so that we know that we're still under their control. So this is a control mechanism. They're just sending out a message. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they kill 1,000 of us, but we're still going to stand up because we're the majority, right? No matter how much of us they kill, they'll never be able to get rid of us because we're so much in number. And the good thing about Dalits and black people we're super fertile. We keep producing more and more sons and daughters, so our race never dies out like their races. So I'd like to keep going. I think even another hour would keep us occupied with a lot of stuff, but we should call it quits because we've been doing it for close to 2 hours now. I don't know if the audience, if we start relaying this to other Black people, will they be patient enough to listen, or maybe we should divide this into different segments and give it as small capsules, because this is mighty big. This is a mighty big pill to swallow in one shot. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we'll have to do it on. We'll have to continue more information on other shows. Certainly, that will be the case. Besides, in 20 minutes, I have to start teaching a class.
Yeah, I have to go pray Maghrib. I have to go pray Maghrib as well. It's very late here now.
Oh wow, yeah. Where you are, it's later than where it is here. And to the credit of Indonesia, Artzuk explained to me that most of the population in Indonesia is actually against what the government is doing in West Papua. That most of them don't agree with the government, but that it's just strictly the government that's doing this. And whereas the Indonesian population will be completely fine with them being treated equally. And I have to give credit where it's due. That's one of the reasons that I specified Southeast Asia as a safe place for Black folks who are looking to escape the oppression in the U.S. And maybe even in other parts of the rest of the white Western diaspora, if you will, because they're not, nobody's gone there and come back and told me that they were mistreated by any of the Malay people in Malaysia or Indonesia or Brunei or Singapore. They have complained about being mistreated by others. I mean, a Somali told me that another Somali got killed in an Indian neighborhood in Malaysia. Must have wandered in there and didn't know, but and it was a rumor. He said, I don't know that it's true. It's just a story I heard. But
we should do a full episode about it. We should do a full episode about it. It's my opinion, because it's Muslims, because it's now a Muslim government oppressing Black people in the Papua region. So
we're going to have to
look at.
We're going to have to develop the courage to say that government's not Muslim if they're oppressing anyone, let alone someone that's already oppressed. We're going to have to learn to start saying that they're not Muslim.
No, we can't do that. We can't do that unless they publicly state that they're not Muslim. We can't call them non-Muslim. But yes, we could say that what they're doing is not Islamic. But we know that Muslims are capable of oppression and tyranny. We know throughout history there are so many examples, and unfortunately, these are the examples that are always highlighted, not the examples of liberation and freedom and equality that Islam created, but these unique examples of tyranny and oppression that the Western world likes to promote as the general impression of Muslims.
Yeah, we would have to study more about the liberation movements. I know they're there. I know of 2 revolts in the Americas, not the U.S., but 2 Islamically inspired revolts in the Americas, possibly 3, and we'd have to learn more from you about the ones in the subcontinent. But
why
that being said,
why only 3? I read somewhere that 60% of the revolts, the slave revolts in the Americas, were started by Muslims. 60%. That's
well, you may have been able to read a source that I just didn't get a hold of. I used to be a history teacher, but that doesn't mean I'm not open to learn more history. So if you read that, in another show one day, inshallah, I'm ready to hear more about it and to share this with the audience.
I read this somewhere just a few days ago. So also I see David Bokuku. I hope I'm reading it right. Bokuku says, my white American colleague doesn't think I'm white, even though my skin is white. With a name like Bokuku, you would look like a Black man a mile away, right? I think he would black out a room when he walked into it. What do you think, Black Mind?
With a name like that, or because it's obviously not a Western European name. And then, of course, in the States, it is very true. Whites in the States do not look at Muslims as being white, regardless of the shade of the skin. If you are an actual Caucasian and you become a Muslim, then they see you as white, but they still see you as a race traitor. They push you out of the family even, and to a certain extent. So no, that with that name, David, no, they're not going. And with you being a Muslim, if he knows you're Muslim, he's definitely not going to call you one. And so light skin is different from whiteness, David. No, they would not do so.
What kind of name is Bokuku? I'm very curious.
Yeah, David, could you type in the chat and tell us what language your last name comes from? I'll give him time to write
out.
it. Well, I can see if he's still in. Let me see. Okay, he said he's from North Africa.
Ah, North Africa. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that I don't know if it's I don't know if his name is an Amazigh name. I'm not sure. I don't think that's an Arab.
Okay. Do they have names like Bokuku? The first time I'm hearing that.
You know, I've only heard
they were
about.
Arabized a long time ago. These people were Arabized a long time ago. I'm surprised he has a first name called David.
Well, it may be Daoud. It may also be that, and this may be a screen name too. I'm not sure. I didn't ask him, but
yeah, I understand. It could be a screen name. Yes,
it's possible, but his point is still valid. He's not going to be. And I'm gonna tell you this, David. Don't try to convince white folks that you're white. Don't waste your time trying to convince them. Because what'll happen if you try to convince white folks that you're white and you're Muslim, you're going to do two things. They're not going to believe you. And the second thing is that if black people hear you trying to convince a white person that you're white, then black folks will be alienated from you and they won't trust you. They'll see that you're trying to win acceptance from whites. And so you wind up distrusted and isolated by everyone. And in the event that you need help, black folk won't come to your aid. And so that's more than likely what will wind up happening. Yeah. Torch, do you have any other questions for me, sir?
Oh, no. We've been talking for 2 hours. I learned a lot of stuff. I'm happy to be talking to you, and I hope we'll continue with our podcast. But my one suggestion before we break off for the day is that we should get this out to as many people as possible. We should start posting in Facebook groups. There are tons of African groups on Facebook. Why don't we post them? But I don't know if they'll listen to a 2-hour session of both of us. We're not famous people, right? We need to have somebody famous for them to listen to us for 2 hours. But we could give them small snippets. We could cut this big episode into different segments, like 5 different segments, maybe. I don't know. Easily palatable, so that they could listen to it and digest the information. You know, we talked about a lot of stuff. I didn't expect to talk about so much, you know. I was only prepared to talk about the Dalit Panthers movement. That's it. But we talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, I might not be famous, but you're about to be, because with a memory as sharp as yours, there's plenty that you can explain to us, as you've done today. And I'll post it where I can. It'll take a while, but an audience will develop for you over time. It'll take time, but it'll develop for you. And I'll go ahead and post it. In 12 minutes, I've got to be in my class, but I will go ahead and post it in the places that I can reach before that.
Yeah, we need to learn how to use the hashtags, and there is a SEO tool, a marketing tool that you can use to promote YouTube videos. YouTube videos are the easiest to market. So we need to learn to do all this stuff. This is all technical stuff that I've read about. I don't know actually how to do it, but I think with a little time, we could actually get this to a much wider audience.
We could eventually. It would take time, but we could.
Inshallah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on and helping us out. I greatly appreciate that. And very welcome, sir. And to the audience members, thank you all for your patience. I understand that this took a long time, y'all, but thank you all for being patient and listening. Hopefully we were able to help you all out. And this is the blackest hearted, blackest minded man on social media, signing black out one more again, and Torch Blaze signing black out. Assalamu alaikum. And black heterosexual male power just because they don't like it.
Assalamu alaikum.